Well, I'm going to take that silence as my cue to start. Thank you, everybody. I'm Professor Simon Jackman. I run the US Study Centre at the University of Sydney in Sydney. And it's always a great honour and a great privilege to be able to come and stage events here in Parliament House, which of course, as does most of Canberra, stand on the traditional lands of the Ngunnawal people. And Mia, I just want to take a slight moment to explain, and to Jason, your husband, who's on his first 24 hours here in Australia, what those words are about. That is what we call an acknowledgement of country. When I left Australia to go to the United States for my postgraduate study, public events didn't start that way in Australia in the late 80s. But when I came back to Australia in 2015 or so, it had become a way that every public event in Australia started. And depending on where you are in Australia, the form of words will change slightly to reflect the names of the locals peoples where you are, and it's a fantastic way of grounding oneself. I find it's still relatively new to me, only having been back in Australia for 3 or 4 years, and I often wonder when we have American visitors, as we often do at the United States Study Centre, what are they talking about? And what they're talking about is a reminder and a way of paying respect to the elders of the local peoples on whose land we meet, and we give respect to elders past, present, and emerging. It's just a nice way of grounding oneself and reminding oneself of where you are, of country. In Sydney, it's the Gadigal people at the University of Sydney, and the part of the Eora Nation, the group of clans that made up the Sydney Basin. But that's what that's about, Mia. I'm sure you've heard that a few times now, but that's what that's about. And for any other American visitors who may be wondering what that's about. So look, thank you for coming out so early this morning, and especially to those of you that work in the building, particularly Linda. I know if you've been around politics, you know how long and intense sitting days are, and to do an event at this hour of the day, knowing you've got a big 12, 13-hour day of legislative activity and representing your district ahead of you, we're enormously grateful, and the same is true for staff and other people that work in the building who are with us this morning. Look, this is a really exciting event for me, something I long wanted ever since we had the great privilege of Mia joining the Centre. So Mia's story is rather remarkable. Born of Haitian immigrants to the United States in Brooklyn, grew up in Connecticut, but then her career in politics really begins in Utah, in local government first of all, and then serving 2 terms in the United States House of Representatives as the first black woman Republican in the House of Representatives. Mia served 2 terms, and as I expect we'll get to in the conversation, the intersection of race and politics in the United States, for anybody even with the most casual understanding of American politics and history, that is an especially fraught intersection. And for Mia to be in that trailblazing role, the first time a black woman has represented the Republican Party in Congress, given the history of that party and the state of race relations in the United States, of enormous historical significance, and the burdens of expectations that fell on Mia is something I imagine we might hear a little bit about over the time we've got together this morning. And of course, with Mia, we've got the Honourable Linda Burney, the member for Barton, a remarkable story in her own right, which is why we wanted to put these 2 remarkable women together this morning. Linda's career before coming to the federal parliament, she served for 13 years in the New South Wales Parliament, and indeed I didn't know this, Linda, the first Aboriginal person to be elected to the New South Wales Parliament, which is the oldest parliament in Australia, the first of the colonial parliaments before it became a state parliament. That's just a remarkable fact. About you, Linda, but about New South Wales and Australia for that matter. And of course, and more contemporarily, Linda was of course the first Aboriginal woman to serve in the House of Representatives from either side of politics, of course. And Linda, of course, with that political career, but before she got into elected office, a long career advancing Indigenous issues going back over 30 years, various roles in the public service. Leading the conversation this morning.
Really not at all ill-equipped to follow such distinguished introductions.
Is Stephanie Peatling, who is the Deputy Federal Editor of the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. And Stephanie, graduate from just across the lake at ANU, but has worked here in Parliament House for many years herself, and extremely well placed, I think, to lead what I expect will be a fascinating conversation between these two trailblazing women. Thank you so much for being with us, and please welcome Mia and Linda and Stephanie. In your hands now. Thank you.
I can't see the clock from where I'm sitting, so can you just give me like a little when you want to do the Q&As? I think we're just going to have a bit of a led discussion to start off with, and then there'll be an opportunity for people to ask questions towards the end. So feel free to note those down if there's something that we're not covering and you want to ask about later on. There'll be ample opportunity for that. Thanks for joining us both today. I feel extremely ill-equipped. I don't have any firsts next to my name that I can claim for my CV. I thought maybe we could start. I mean, we've heard Simon's given the introduction about listing your achievements and details and so on, but I wondered if you could perhaps start off by saying what motivated both of you to go into politics in the first place. It's such a confrontational and adversarial environment. What led you both to move from careers of public service to the other side of public service, I suppose?
Okay. Well, first of all, it would be unfortunate if I didn't mention how grateful I am and how honored I am to be sitting next to Representative Linda Burney. We come from very, very different backgrounds, but the struggles have gotten us to where we are today. I remember when I first met President Barack Obama and Michelle Obama, and she, as he was kind of pushing us through and getting us through, he was very incredibly stoic, and she took a moment to say, "Mia, is this the first time we're meeting?" And I said, "Yes," and she said, "Set the bar high. Just set the bar high. I'm glad you're here." So for someone who, I obviously as a Republican going after the president quite a bit on policy, taking that moment was really important because there are so many people that paved the way, and a difficult upbringing, or I would say more so for my parents, could either make or break you. You could either decide to do something with it and show your children and the world that the world doesn't revolve around you, that you have to use your gifts or talents. And I guess that's how things started for me. This is not something that I said I wanted to do when I grow up. I had other ideas outside of politics, but there was my dad told me on the way to college, he said, "I don't want you to be a burden to society. You're going to give back." And every opportunity that I've had where somebody said, "Look, you've got to do this. We need you to do this." I heard that voice in my head. And really, that's how I got started in politics. It had something to do with a local problem. And they said, "Mia, go fix it." And I said, "Okay."
Look, thank you, Mia, and thank you, Stephanie and Simon, and good morning, everyone. Is my microphone on?
Yes.
Can I just join with Simon in recognising Ngunnawal and Ngambri country? Good morning to Jason. Well, I'm sorry you've been to Sydney Airport 4 times in 24 hours. That sounds awful. And also I'd like to just say thank you everyone for coming so early in the morning, and thank you to my parliamentary colleagues that have made the effort as well. And thank you to my staff for making sure that I'm here. So, Balam Ambul Nanawul Nambri. I am Wiradjuri, and I am from the Murrumbidgee Wiradjuri, which is the southern end of Wiradjuri territory on the Murrumbidgee River. What motivated me? I think Mia and I do share so much. I, though, didn't come from a very big city. I was born in a tiny country town. In fact, it was so small that you could name every single person in every house, which we regularly did. And I grew up under challenging circumstances in many ways. My great aunt and uncle raised me. I didn't meet my father until I was 28, to meet 10 brothers and sisters that I didn't know existed. Such were the laws and the attitudes when I was born. I think growing up, I had to become very resilient at a very young age and very self-reliant. And the idea of you can't do this just was not part of my world. And that was a lot to do with the way that I was raised, but it was a lot to do, I think, with my, my personality as well. And for me, there are three things that motivated me to go into mainstream politics. I had spent 30 years, as Simon generously said, not so generously. I think it was more than 30 actually, Simon. Really in the Aboriginal struggle, in First Nations struggle, and that was political. If you're born black in this country, it's political. And whilst I didn't have a vision that I would end up in mainstream politics, my path led me to that. It led me to becoming the member for Canterbury in 2003, incredibly multicultural community, and then progressed me into the federal parliament, which is not the pathway for everyone, but I mean, I take my hat off to local government. I mean, I just, you know, the idea of going into a doctor's surgery and someone wanting to talk to you about their garbage not being collected, it's not my idea of fun. Mind you, we get lots of ibises and cracks in the footpath as well, and overhanging trees. That's a big one.
Yeah.
So I guess for me there were, and I'll finish on this, Stephanie. There were three things that really motivated me to go into mainstream politics, and those three things that motivated me in 2003 are the same things that motivate me today. And they're not in any particular order. There weren't enough women, there weren't enough Indigenous people, and my entire life had been about social justice and truth-telling. And I saw this as a way to do that as well.
Simon mentioned the burden of expectation that comes with being a first in any kind of representative position, and I'm interested in this because as a reporter, obviously, we love to seize on people who are firsts because it makes them special and unique, as they are. Obviously, when you're going first, you're leading the trail for other people. But I wondered if you could speak a little bit about what it feels like to be the first. It comes with great responsibility, obviously, of which you're both mindful. But does it lead you, do you think, to conduct yourself in possibly a different way than other people coming into politics might do, in terms of people looking up to you and seeing you as leaders for them, whether they're women of colour or women or coming from a different background, given that politics is basically a white man's game?
Well, there's so many different ways to answer that question because it's incredibly multifaceted. A lot of people think that being the first is just, oh my gosh, okay, great, you're breaking the glass ceiling, but there is a lot of responsibility being there. And it's also the pathway to get there was incredibly difficult also. I always felt like I had to work twice as hard. People were, I remember when I got up to speak and somebody said, yeah, you got up there and people were surprised because there was this thought that you were not a great communicator. I don't know why. They'd never really heard me get up and talk. And every single time after that, it's like people were surprised and you had to find yourself rising to the occasion all the time. The other thing also is that in the United States, the majority of the country assumes that if you are a black female, you are obviously a Democrat. And so with that, for me, it was, I always got the question, well, why? Why would you be these, all of these things, and why aren't you a Democrat? The best way I can answer that question is there was a woman that asked me at the University of Chicago once. She said, I don't understand how you could be a black female Latter-day Saint Republican in living in Utah in today's America. How does that work? And I said, it's because I refuse to fit this mold that society tells me I have to fit into. Imagine if people like Martin Luther King decided to just take that government said he was a second-class citizen. We wouldn't be here today. So what I would say is my policies and my thoughts, and I'm all of these things because I don't want people to think the way I do. I want them to preserve the right to be who they are, to think the way they do, to be able to have a voice. And I think that when you have people of color on both sides of the aisle, that's great for the United States. It's great for our relationship with other countries. That is a good thing. Having that, being able to have those dialogues in the different backgrounds only increases our sphere of knowledge.
Of course it comes with responsibility. But one of the things that I think is really important, we've got people like Anne Ali here, first Muslim woman in the Parliament, spectacular. And
gorgeous, by the way.
And gorgeous. Don't tell her that. I was raised by, as I said, my great aunt and uncle, who were born in the 1890s. I'm much older than Mia. And they raised me to be frugal, to be respectful, to never put your back to anyone, to never speak over anyone, to be humble, to be full of grace, and to show respect and be kind. And those things, those values have stayed with me my entire life. And those values are important in political dialogue and exchange. And, you know, Mia and I come from similar backgrounds, very probably quite different politics, but quite similar politics as well. So you shouldn't ever think that just because you're from a particular party that you don't have a lot to share, a lot in common. We've got wonderful independents here as well. So the weight of expectation for me is obviously from the Aboriginal community. But I don't see it as a weight. I see it as a celebration. And, you know, I am very respected. I'm seen as a senior woman moving culturally through. I'll reach eldership at some point within the Aboriginal context. But I deliberately didn't take the Aboriginal Affairs portfolio until just recently. And I did that for the same reasons that Mia's articulated. I was not going to be put into a frame or a box. I was not going to be defined by what was expected of me, that I was the expert on all things Aboriginal, because I'm certainly not. So it's about how you actually conduct yourself. It's about what's made you the person that you are. And I find that within the political sphere, as tough as it is, as hard as it is, if you are respectful, then you get a lot further and a lot more things done than if you're not.
I mean, I have to add on to this, because I think that this is the world's problem. These dialogues not happening. The fact that we could be sitting here and just coming in with a mutual respect and an appreciation for our different backgrounds and seeing the similarities in that, I think that that's what the United States certainly is missing. It's getting a lot worse. And I think that there's mutual respect that is missing in politics. I can guarantee you that if we sat down and we spoke about the relationship between Australia and the United States, we would find far more things that we agree on, that we can work on together, and do a lot more than focusing on the things that we disagree on.
I was going to raise the issue of the divisiveness of politics later, but you've both raised it now, so we might as well go there immediately. It's something that we all talk about these days. It seems to be such a modern phenomenon, whether it's the fault of Fox News in the United States, or Sky News in Australia, or Twitter, or social media, or different types of people coming into politics. We seem to be moving to a point in our history where we're unable to look beyond the things that make us different to the things that make us the same. And this process seems to be being accelerated in the past few years to a point where we're almost unable to look beyond those things that make us different. I was wondering if you could both reflect a little bit on that and maybe look beyond that to some solutions of how we could get past that so we can become a more constructive society, I suppose, both here and America.
Elect women.
Yeah.
It was a free kick, that one.
There is no question that political life is difficult, and it is full of sacrifice. And the people that sacrifice the most are generally your children, if you have them, and your family, because you're away so much and there is so much demand on your time. I'm just astounded at young women here in particular, and men that have young families. Look, I give as good as I get. And I say very genuinely that as a woman in the political arena, you don't emulate anyone, you be yourself. And you allow your own strengths to lead how you conduct yourself. And it's adversarial. That's the nature of the political landscape in Australia. That is just the Westminster system. Yeah. It's adversarial. And if you go into it thinking that it's not going to be, then perhaps you're going into the wrong profession. But what strikes me is that it is whether you're from the Conservative side, whether you're an independent, or whether you're from Labor, you're all there for the same reason. You're there to represent and carry the loves, the hurts, the disappointments, the joys of people that put their trust in you. I don't know about the US, but in Australia, I think it's about 140,000 votes in the electorate of Barton, is that right? Something like that. So it depends on whether you're a city, regional or a city seat. And your job is to represent those people. And every single day, and this is true, I get up and I remind myself that people are relying on you. People are trusting you. People have put their faith in you. And it's a responsibility. And that's the essence of politics. And in terms of the adversarial side of things, I mean, you know, Stephanie, you see the Parliament fill up when there's a division, or you see the Parliament fill up and carry on when there's question time. But at other times, it's not like that. It's people trying to work through legislation that is going to be beneficial for the lives. I disagree with a lot of what the other side of the House does, but I don't underestimate the power of the people.
I mean, Mia, you have a very unique take on this, don't you? I mean, for those people who aren't aware, although you probably are, when Mia was running her campaign, at one point she had a direct intervention from the president on Twitter as votes were being counted.
I read about her.
Which is about as adversarial as I would get, as you could get, I imagine. And I know you've spoken a lot about this in the past, Mia, but I wonder if you could just talk about that issue to the audience here. I mean, it would be, I can't imagine the Prime Minister of either party, whoever they would be in this country, tweeting as votes were being counted.
It wasn't. It was on TV.
On TV, sorry. You know, XYZ.
Yeah.
You know, wasn't very nice to me in the campaign. So you know, tough luck, basically. Which is essentially what happened.
Well, I think so in the grand scheme of things, what I think was happening at the time was the president was trying to make a point that those who weren't with him weren't really winning. Okay, so here is the other part of me. I have never allowed somebody else's words to have power over me. Never. As a matter of fact, he could have said quite a bit worse, and I would have just said, you know, whatever flaws you have are your flaws. They're not mine. So, but what it did, honestly, is give me an opportunity to represent the kinder, the compassionate side of my party. It gave me an opportunity to rise to the occasion. You talked about the different media out there. You talk about Fox. I'm a correspondent for CNN, a contributor. And I am a conservative voice on that network. And I think that what TV tries to do is, because they're not politicians, they're based on like ratings and trying to get a viewership. I think what is most important is for people who are literally representing people. I think the House of Representatives, and I believe it's the same, is the branch of government that's closest to people, right? So even if you have your own ideas, your responsibility is to represent those people who've put you there. So with that being said, I think it would, if we focused on empowering people instead of victimizing them, all of a sudden there's a different take on the attitudes out there. I think that there have been a lot of victimizing, not just, I think it started even with the previous administration in terms of saying, if you don't have this, it's because somebody took it away. It's a lot easier to blame other people. But I think that when you start to empower people, giving them the opportunities to be strong, to know that whatever circumstance you're in. I always say in the United States, there should never be this idea that you're predestined to be poor. We have got to make sure that people have an opportunity to rise to the middle class and beyond if that's what they choose to do. So I think that we have a responsibility as people to, one, make sure that we are empowering others, especially representatives, and two, to make sure that we do not allow other people to allow us to behave poorly. there are a lot of excuses that people could use for the behaviors of politicians and say, you know, they made me do this. I think it's important for us to be the writers of our own history, and stand up and remember what Linda said previously. I don't think it's a bad idea to elect women. I think it's actually a good idea. I remember just thinking of my children, and you talked about waking up saying I have a responsibility to people, and I have their voices in my head. I remember always saying the same thing and saying that I have to make every moment away from my children count. So I was more interested in getting things done than I was with the fighting or the debate.
There's been, Mayor, you probably aren't aware of this, but the Labor Party, of which Linda is a member, has taken great steps over the past 20 or 30 years to elect more women to Parliament. There's been a quota system in place for a while in order to lift the level of the numbers of women in federal Parliament. I think it's just hit 50-50, or it's just shy of it. Sorry? 48%, so just close. I'll round it up. And they've just made that milestone at the most recent election. The Conservative side of politics, the Liberal and National Party, have done not as well, shall we say. And there's constantly a debate around ways to get more women into Parliament. I think the discussion about having people from different ethnic backgrounds, particularly people from Indigenous backgrounds, is nowhere near the same level of focus and concentration for us. But I wondered if you could tell us about the debate in America around that. I mean, I imagine being from the Republican Party, quotas is not something that you would be in favour of. But what are the types of discussions that you have there about having people from different backgrounds coming into politics and the best way to get them there?
Look, I think I can be honest and open and say that the Republican Party really should and must do a better job reaching out to women and reaching out to communities, minority communities. You can't sit there and say, well, our policies are good for everyone, so I'm just going to do that. You have to let people know that you actually care about them in order for them to trust you. You have to get out, and I don't know, I used to say this to my Republican colleagues all the time. How many of you have actually been in government housing? How many have actually gone to and spoken to some families that are really caught in intergenerational poverty? It's one thing to say, our policies are meant to keep people out of that, and our policies should make it so that people in poverty, they're not trapped in there, and you make it so that they can find a way to get out of it and become independent contributing members of society. It's another thing to actually go in and actually speak to people, talk back and forth. You can't legislate from a seat in Washington and expect people to feel that you are with them on TV or the slam on the desk or the podium. It doesn't quite work. So I do believe that we have to do the Republican Party really has to do more to reach out to minority communities, and the policy is not enough. The message is important, and the communication is important. And although people may disagree with me in the Republican Party, I think that that's really what's missing. Primarily in the dialogue that we're having right now in the White House especially. It's just you can't make people feel like you dislike them and then have them trust you. That it just doesn't, it won't work.
Linda, I wanted to also ask if we could have an update on the constitutional referendum issue. Mayor, there's a debate here at the moment about recognising Indigenous Australians in the Constitution. It's well overdue, shamefully overdue. It's basically bogged down in process, I think is probably the fairest way of describing it at this point in time. There's a debate around the timing of when we will have this vote, whether or not both sides of politics should support the wording before we can possibly even put the vote to the people. There's all manner of issues that are being discussed at the moment. But I was wondering, Linda, if we could have an update from you on that, given I think the latest we've heard was the Minister for Indigenous Affairs saying last week he did want to have a referendum, I think, by the next federal election, which is less than 3 years away, and seems to be a fairly ambitious timetable, I think.
Well, just on the previous question, we've got Annika here, who was part of the wonderful group of women that came into our party in May this year. So we are at 48%. I think
If one of you put on weight a bit, maybe we could get you up to 50%.
she was playing netball at 6 a.m. this morning. I don't think it's going to be her. Look, everyone, just without labouring the point, I think the question of constitutional recognition of First Nations people, or a voice for First Nations people into our constitution, is the actual moral question for the 46th Parliament. I really and truly do. And I wish we had a Prime Minister that thought that as well. So where it's at, it's a really interesting juncture. So the Labor Party, and I'm not being partisan. I'm not being partisan here. In fact, I'm trying to be bipartisan. The Labor Party embraces the Uluru Statement in full, and I think you all know when I say the Uluru Statement, which says 3 things: that the First Nations people want an enshrined voice in the Australian Constitution. There should be a Makarrata Commission established to pursue the issue of treaty making. And the third point is a national process of truth-telling. So that is what the party that I'm a part of has embraced. The Conservative side of politics is saying at the moment that they will have a legislated voice, not an enshrined voice in the Constitution, but a legislated voice for First Nations people, and a referendum on recognition of First Nations people within the Constitution. And the issue of treaty making and the issue of truth-telling has completely fallen off the agenda. So they're 2 different positions. What the government will do, though, is that they are about to embark on a co-design process. And what the Labor Party has said is that we will be informed by the co-design process. If First Nations people say, well, there's 2 things that First Nations people could say. The first is it's an enshrined voice in the Constitution or nothing, and we've got nothing now, so, you know. Or they will say, we will accept a legislated body, providing it moves towards some sort of enshrinement or permanency. So the issue at the nub of this is a permanent body of Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islanders advising this Parliament. And that's the nub of it. You'll hear lots of things, but the nub of it is permanency, or something that the Parliament of the day cannot dismiss, because we are still burnt very much by the dismissal of ATSIC some 20 or 25 years ago. That's still burnt into the soul of Indigenous Australia. So we are at a juncture of, in my view, if things don't start immediately in terms of the design of a voice or whatever the constitutional issue is that we will lose it for this term of government, and that would be a great shame, not only for Aboriginal Australia, but for the whole country.
I'm trying to read Linda's watch upside down, which I think is telling me that we are on to the time for the Q&As now. I've got lots more questions, but I won't hog the microphone. Who would like to start? Who has some questions that we could start off with? Oh, I feel like the speaker.
On the topic of... sure. Do I need to introduce myself as well?
Oh, yes, you do.
Hello, Annika Wells, member for Lily. On the topic of quotas and changing the culture of politics so that more women feel or are encouraged to get in, I was wondering what your thoughts were, now we've got you in the country, about how that's going in America, because our side of politics is doing very well, and I think we have a really good supportive group of women. Like I'm a new parliamentarian, I'm the youngest woman in the House, I've got women I can go to.
Right.
When I talk to my friends on the other side of the House, from the Conservatives, they say that they find things tougher when our side is very bolshy about how progressive we are and how we support women. So I was wondering, given you've got the squad in US politics, how does the emergence of the squad and the celebration of the squad, how is that received on your side, and does that make things more difficult for you and for women on your side trying to get people involved?
Well, first of all, I don't think the squad makes a difference in terms of getting women involved. I think that it has the politics side of it has moved a little bit further to the left on that, and that's also caused the other side to move a little bit further to the right. So we've got this big gap in the middle where people used to actually have conversation. I was the only Republican member in the Congressional Black Caucus. And I think that, let me first of all say, I'm not sad about the loss of the seat. I'm more upset about the work that was actually being done and the fact that I was a voice in the Republican conference that represented the Congressional Black Caucus, which is supposed to be, which made it even more bipartisan. It's supposed to be nonpartisan, but it really made it nonpartisan. There is not that weave of different people on different sides of the aisle for the same cause right now. So on the women's side of it, I think that Democrats do a better job in recruiting. I think there are 3 steps: recruiting, during the recruitment, support, advising and helping during the process, and 3, keeping women. On the Republican side, we are very good at recruiting women because there are a lot of women out there. Elise Stefanik, who I was a member of Congress with, has gone out and actually recruited really good women. The problem is the party does not support women through the process, and when women are there, they don't keep women very well in the process. So what I mean by that is there was a bill that I wanted to introduce, along with a lot of really important other bills, but there was one that was over-the-counter contraceptives. That I felt was incredibly important, especially when we're talking about health care. Also, you may agree or disagree with where I am on this issue, but I felt like it was important. I'm a pro-lifer. I felt like it was important for me to give women the choice before they have to make the choice between keeping a life and ending a life. Empowering, again, women to make their own healthcare decisions before they get to the point where they have to make those very difficult decisions. The biggest problem I had were Republican men in stopping that bill. It didn't make any sense to me. So it was very difficult because we have a lot of women that carry very important bills that I think, again, the communicator is important. I got some support on the other side of the aisle, and that was difficult. In all, in terms of recruiting, I had some great people. Paul Ryan, former Speaker of the House, that was really helpful to me. I had Kevin McCarthy, Eric Cantor, some really good people that were incredibly supportive. I've got some great friends that are there. Are we doing enough on the broad end of it? No. And I think it's also something that women don't get up and stand in front of the mirror and say, I'm going to run for Congress today. I'm really good at this. You know, I think that this is, we've got so much, it takes a lot of convincing. It really does. I hear women all the time say, I don't know, I don't have enough experience. Well, shoot, if you run a successful household, you have enough experience. And in the United States, women run the economy. They take their kids to school. They're the ones taking them to the doctor's office. Ask my husband, right? Yes. But of course you're experienced enough. You just have to get in there, and if you're not standing up, if you're not making your voice heard, women especially, if you're not standing up, if you're not making your voice heard, if you are not running, someone else inferior to you is going to do it for you. Someone is going to fill that vacuum.
Can I just make a
Yeah,
comment on
please.
that, just really briefly? So I think the reason that the Labor side of politics in Australia has done so well in terms of getting women into Parliament is because it was incremental. This thing didn't happen
just happen overnight. Yeah.
It was. I remember the late Joan Kerner, and then we've got Emily's List. I think Emily's List is in America as well. Yeah. And we've also built into the Labor Party platform and practices systemic representation of women, and the quota system's really important. And it's about women standing for pre-selection, identifying women, and when you've got a bulk of women within the caucus, then the issues are, it's just normal, it's natural. And, you know, even down to your local branch levels, there has to be a certain number of women in leadership positions. So it's systemic, it's right through the party and in the party rules, and that does make an enormous difference.
I'll just jump in there, Mayor. Obviously, the party organisation system is very different in America, but how important is the issue of getting more women into Congress and the White House for the Republican Party? And has it been made more difficult by President Trump?
Well, I think in order for the Republican Party to survive, I think it's important to, we had actually a decent number of women in Congress. The previous, in the 115th Congress, we're in the 116th right now. We lost over half of the women, Republican women. And it's for several reasons of what I've talked about today. One is making sure that we are giving women the voice on issues that they can message and relate to people on. And two, when women are weakened, it makes it easier for the other party to come in and target that. There's also this, there isn't, in the United States, there isn't really anyone more the political parties. And what I mean, I'm talking about like the DCCC. I got along very well with the Democrat women and congressional members very well. In Congress, and we worked really well with each other. But when I'm talking about the political parties, there isn't anyone that they dislike more than a Republican black woman, because it's just like, oh wait a minute, but that's more about who holds power than it is about policy. And again, I want to say it's to our detriment. We almost sit in the position and in the mess that we're in because we had great examples. We had 42, when I first started, we had 20 members in the Climate Solutions Caucus. By the time my job was to try and recruit as many Republicans as possible, by the time we were at the end of 2018, we had 42 Republican members in the Climate Solutions Caucus. Those people, we have 7 now. They're gone. They get scooped up and they get targeted. So we almost have to look and see what issues are important to us. And there's also this saying not to let perfect be the enemy of a really good win. I'm going to be watching today to see what happens. But, you know, it is a progress and it is a process. And obviously, I'm hoping that I may be the first Black female Republican. There isn't one right now, and I hope that I'm not the only one in the future. I think that would be tragic.
Sorry, I jumped back in there. So, who was next with the questions from the floor? Can you put your hands up so we can see you and give you a microphone, please? Surely there must be some questions from the floor. Oh, you've got more. Great, yes. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mia and Linda. This is fascinating conversation. The notion of respect in everyday life and in politics. I work in a male-dominated environment, and I hear and I witness often women being talked over when they try to give an expert opinion, but while the men are speaking, everyone is listening. We also know in the Australian Parliament, Sarah Henson-Young, how she's been treated in terms of her sexuality, and so it can get very vicious and very personal. But also what I've observed is often women who have achieved power can also be really mean or not very supportive towards other women. Would you be happy to comment on your own observation?
Linda, do you have any observations?
Thank you. This is what you're describing does happen. Just because you're a woman in a senior position doesn't mean you support other women. But I do think that that's changing, and you just don't put up with that crap. You just don't. I don't. And I always say I speak to a lot of young women, and that's why I say, be yourself, understand how you were made, and never forget, ever, that you rest on the shoulders of others, and that you now have a responsibility to allow your shoulders, to give your shoulders for others to rest on. That is my way of doing things. I agree with you, that's not everyone's way, but it's how you conduct yourself. You're not going to change necessarily other people, but you, as long as you conduct yourself in the way that's honourable, I think that's what's important.
Yeah, I tell my kids, don't look at anybody else's Twitter account. Look at my Twitter account. I mean, but I do think you're right. There are a lot of my problem, I believe, in my state, and although we changed that quite a bit, it was a process to change that. We had a hard time with with a lot of the women vote. Women are incredibly traditional for the most part. In the state of Utah, we have a lot of women that choose to stay home and take care of their families, and that's really important. So sometimes it's difficult for a woman who cannot see herself going there to send another woman there. I got a lot of, how does your husband feel about this? I got a lot of, how are your children? Yeah, how are your children? But what they don't, what I've had to articulate, and like I said, thank goodness I have a husband that has been so incredibly supportive, and it's just, our whole family has been on this journey. It wasn't just my journey, it was our whole family's journey. I'm really quite lucky to have such a great support there. I think that makes a difference. And also, one of the things my children have learned is they get to use their gifts and their talents for the betterment of society. And there's no better way to do that than by seeing a parent go out and do it. I mean, you can say whatever you want to children. You can say whatever you want to people that are looking, that are hearing us. But there is not a better example than actually seeing a woman like Linda represent a group of just people that really need that voice desperately. There is no more powerful message than seeing these women stand up and say, I believe in something, and I'm going to articulate that. That is what provokes other young kids and young women to do that and start to support each other.
Can I just finish? I know we've
Yeah,
got to
go
finish
for it.
up.
No,
and,
go for it.
We're nearly at the end of our discussion, but you know, when I think about my life, if it had not been for the women in my life, I would not be able to stand up. And it's about nurturing those relationships, keeping them close to you, seeing how precious they are, and realising that, as I said, I'm much older than Mia, but that the responsibility I carry as a woman. And that is a big responsibility. It's an important responsibility, and it's a responsibility to make sure that you support other women.
I can't quite see the time. Do we have time for one more question? One more? Oh, okay, we might have to wrap up. Well, I will say thank you very much
Thank
to Linda
you.
and Mia for their
Yeah.
time, and then I think Simon's going to do a final word of thanks. Is that right?
I will briefly wrap up too. Thank you.
We'll all briefly wrap up.
Linda, thank you, Mia. Thank you, Stephanie. That was as remarkable as I expected it would be. Does that still make
Oh
it
my gosh,
remarkable?
I'm
But,
inspired.
and thank you again, everybody, for coming out this morning. At the US Study Centre, we're acutely aware that the politics of First Nations peoples are not the politics of African Americans or Haitian Americans or Black America more broadly. But nonetheless, I think the conversation this morning revealed, I think, as both Mia and Linda said at alternate occasions, there's more that unites us than divides us. And I think in particular the conversation at the end that really focused on your role, not as bearers of your respective races and ethnicities, but as bearers of women in politics. That particularly resonated for me on that score, and thank you for sharing, and thank you for laning the conversation there, everybody. And thank you to everybody, particularly members of the House. Great to see you here this morning. Thank you for helping us with the event this morning. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy your day. Thank you.